letting you loose on the Desetter Manor once more. Alone in the Dark is a modern reimagining of the 1992 survival horror classic from Infogrames. Here it is in fact. The original Alone in the Dark is widely considered to be the first ever 3D survival horror game. Released on PC initially, it was something of a precursor to Capcom's Resident Evil series, which debuted later in 1996, and it's easy to count the similarities. The 2D pre-rendered backdrops overlaid with 3D polygonal models, a choice of two characters, tank controls, plus a mixture of puzzle solving and combat. All of it was pioneering for its day. Even with its cartoonishly exaggerated character models, it still has an eerie charm. I won't pretend it's an easy one to simply dive into today either. Honestly, the controls do take some getting used to, but it truly laid out the blueprint for a genre, survival horror, that would explode in popularity across the 90s. Flash forward 32 years then, and a lot has changed, obviously, in the standards of modern game design. This new 2024 release of Alone in the Dark is built on Unreal Engine 4. It also takes a point from the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes in moving away from the static pre-rendered backdrops in favour of fully 3D environments. It's a big change, but a well-executed one from developer Pieces Interactive. Every inch of the estate is now beautifully detailed. The third-person camera view lets you take in the brushstrokes of every portrait, every decaying ornament, all of which are flanked by shadows from your clip-on flashlight. It gives us a modern take on its action too, with plenty in the way of weapons to dispatch its nightmarish creatures. But crucially, the focus on puzzle solving is still in keeping with the spirit of the 1992 original. You'll navigate the mansion for cryptic clues, you'll scour each room for keys or pieces of puzzles that need to be rearranged. It's all hugely satisfying once you figure it all out, and all of this is built to spec just for current-gen PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S consoles plus PC. So, how do these three consoles compare in visual terms, and what's the state of their 60fps performance modes? Let's find out. There are some visual high points here, but also some technical issues worth addressing up front. Character models are nicely detailed to start, with stars Jodie Comer and David Harbour providing their likeness for the leads. It even goes as far as using subsurface scattering for skin, with every freckle and mole scanned into the in-game renders. The environments are also densely littered with detail. Every room is distinctly themed, with rocking horses, swaying curtains, abandoned dolls, many of which are interactive with physics-based properties. We even get volumetric lighting plus light shafts streaking through balcony windows. We get a form of global illumination as well, where select rooms emit a vivid hue of green, red or blue, which almost mimics the eerie lighting of a Dario Argento film. And lastly, there are the nightmare sequences. At select points, you'll abruptly enter an alternate reality, one that's in ruin, set ablaze, or even overrun with mold. Insects scuttle across its walls, rats scurry underfoot, and otherworldly creatures launch at you in a frenzy. There's a lot of great visual design going into the manor then, and as a fun Easter egg, the game even lets you switch to the original 1992 Alone in the Dark models. Which leads us to the downsides. Sadly, there are some rough spots, bugs, and even stability issues right now. Point number one is that the camera struggles while aiming in confined spaces, which is often given that so much of the game is set inside the manor. Combat really suffers, especially in trying to spot the prompt to pick up an object. Next along, there are the low quality effects. The blood splatter from enemies is especially poor. It's low resolution, as are the fire alpha effects on throwing a Molotov cocktail. You'd expect a lot more from a PS5 or Series X title here. And lastly, perhaps most urgent of all, I experienced a software crash about 2 to 3 hours into the adventure on Series S. It's a relief that the game does autosave regularly, but many of these points do need addressing. It's worth stressing that PS5 and Series X deliver many of these highs and lows in equal measure, though Series S has other drawbacks in visual settings. The good news, at least, is that all three consoles get a matching couple of modes. one for 60 FPS performance and the other being a 30 FPS quality mode that prioritizes resolution. Taking PS5 in example, the resolution difference is really the only one of note between the modes, and all other settings stay in place regardless of your selection. With that in mind, let's check out the quality modes on each console first in a three-way split. We get a native 4K on PS5 and Series X here, which is a great start. Typically, it's at the full 3840 by 2160, though rare moments drop to 1836p in taxing cutscenes. And then, on Series S, we're typically at 900p with no noted res drops under, though obviously it is possible. The result, inevitably, is that the image is blurrier on Series S, while fine subpixel detail like facial hair is also lost in the upscale from 900p. Also, predictably, PS5 and Series X are identical in settings as you might expect, in textures, shadows, and beyond, though the Series S version has a few other notable limits. The main point is that textures are dropped in quality. On character faces, clothing, or the paintings strewn across the manor, most textures run at a low quality setting, which isn't flattering viewed up close. Ambient occlusion shading is also lowered on Series S. In general though, it's the texture quality and 900p resolution that stick out most. Also, frustratingly, all HUD elements, icons, text, and so on run at 1080p on Series S, creating a rough aliased result. On the surface then, the quality mode looks like a respectable 4K experience on PS5 and Series X at least. Turning to the frame rate testing though, it quickly reveals a big issue in that we get improper frame pacing at 30 FPS. There isn't any way to disguise this fact. Performance is often locked at 30 FPS, but judder is abundant anyway. Frame times jump between 16, 33, and 50 milliseconds on that left side graph, and that goes for PS5, Series X, and S in equal measure. No machine gets away unscathed. I suppose the silver lining here is that the frame rate is at least mostly locked at 30, so in that sense it is well optimized, but the end result just doesn't feel pleasant in motion. On the upside, all consoles offer a motion blur setting ranging from off to low, medium, high, and ultra. It might help to smooth the lateral motion a little, but again, it's hard to disguise the judder on quick pans. As a 30 FPS option, it's overall one to avoid, especially when there's a 60 FPS performance mode one menu selection away. Jumping to the performance mode, starting with PS5 here, this is much more like it. The outlook is more positive, with 60 FPS in view most of the time, whether it's exploring, puzzle solving, or in combat itself. Generally anyway. In terms of resolution, it drops to a fully dynamic setup this time, between 1080p and 4K. Typically, you're looking at figures like 1440p for most of gameplay, where all sub 4K frames are reconstructed with what is likely AMD's FSR2 in this case. The final image still looks decent most of the time, though flashes of the true raw pixel count are obvious in quick movement. And unfortunately, again, fine details like hair tend to struggle in the upscale. As for the frame rate itself, PS5's reading is often solid at 60 FPS, though do expect single frame drops and even the occasional hitch in moving between areas. Notably, there's this streaming hiccup in this outdoor segment, always in the exact same spot, which is a little jarring. As for sustained drops, fire effects around enemies at times take us down to the 45 FPS line in the marshland of Chapter 2. Plus, several cutscenes even push the machine well into the 40s. It's not a perfect return on PS5 then, but outside of these moments, the manor itself is usually optimized for 60 FPS at least. Switching to Xbox Series X on its performance mode, we're again faced with a dynamic 1080p to 4K range. Image clarity is on average in the same place as PS5. There's also a decent lock at 60 FPS mostly here too, except rapid movement is more of an issue on Series X I've noticed. It seems streaming assets between areas of the manor produces more hitches and frame rate dips overall, at least based on the first 3 hours. In effect, this manifests as larger clusters of dropped frames on Series X just as we approach any new room, and this only adds to the existing cases of hitching in the marshland outdoors that we see on PS5. It's an extra distraction that the game really doesn't need, but mostly, again, it is in the right place at 60 FPS. The major outliers in terms of drops are in effects-heavy areas and combat, and similar to PS5, the collision of heavy fire alpha transparencies and enemies takes us well into the low 50s or high 40s. And very occasional cutscenes, like this encounter in the cave, also has Series X drop constantly just like PS5. On the whole, I'd still recommend using the performance mode on both premium consoles, but do go in expecting some frame rate nosedives in very specific scenarios and occasional hitches at points. Last up is the Series S on its performance mode. In terms of resolution, this is striving for 900p at best, with a lower bounds of 800 by 450. And in a bid to keep 60 FPS in check, which to its credit it does most of the time, the typical resolution often falls in between those figures at 684p. Okay, this is obviously in no way flattering to the incredible detail put into the manor. Even in the best case at 900p, it's a blurry image on Series S, but at 450p, there's serious breakup, flicker, and visual noise on any movement. Any camera cut also reveals briefly a very clear low base resolution. Sadly, this is the sacrifice, along with the lower texture resolution, to get to 60 FPS. The benefit is that the frame rate is actually very much on par with Xbox Series X. Most areas flow at 60, albeit with similar blips and hitches to Series X along the way. It's also a surprise to find that I could not get any major sustained drops in combat, try as I might, though cutscenes, like the encounter in this cave, do still drop. Series S is playable at 60 FPS otherwise, just do be warned that the cost to image quality is dear, and it doesn't 100% avoid drops. That's the state of Alone in the Dark on console. Above all else, the game's best quality is its puzzles, and for that alone, it's worth persevering for. The unfortunate lack of polish in some areas doesn't quite diminish that appeal. I found genuine joy in decoding some of the devious clues laid out in each room, as a callback to the cryptic style of puzzle solving in series like Broken Sword, or even Little Big Adventure on PC. Except here, today, the stability issues, the camera controls in combat, and oddly low quality effects do need some work. It's not terribly far off the mark on PS5 or Series X, but frankly, the state of the Series S version's image quality at 60 FPS is unfortunate. The ideal experience is really at 60 FPS, where the sacrifice to get there is a steep one for the 4 teraflop console. Still, as a reimagining of such a milestone release, Alone in the Dark has a surprising hook to it. It has a great eerie atmosphere and puzzles driven by meticulous detailing across the manor, if you're able to accept the technical rough points that go with it. But that's all from me today. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.